difficult, especially when we got into the weeds on a few like councils and decrees and all this kind of stuff. So what I want to do is I want to ask this question first. And since Matthew is arguing in the affirmative in this debate, Orpheus in the negative, we'll kind of start with a Matthew response. We'll go to a warfare response. And what I'd like it to be is I like it to continue to be cordial. So please don't interrupt each other or talk over each other. I'll give open room for both of you. If I think that one of you is going on too long and not actually like getting to the point, and like you've taken up 10 minutes, I might step in and be like, could we get to a point here, right? Because the whole goal of this section is to help the audience understand, right? So if you're going on too long, it might cause problems for the audience, which is, I mean, our ultimate goal is to help the audience, and especially those people in the audience who are considering and thinking about Orthodoxy and Catholicism, right? Or who might just have questions about these things. So, the first thing that I want to go over is for the Protestants and the people here dealing with the debate between the two sides and trying to figure out, I'd like to sort of direct this by starting with history. And the history question is related to what is the strongest argument for your form of ecclesiology in the first 4 centuries of Christianity, and why do you think that's the strongest argument that you have to make within those first 4 centuries of Christianity? And try to direct this towards those people who might be wanting to learn about your side, right? And not really toward your opponent.
Well, I think limiting it at the 4th century is a bit early, because in terms of like the theological system of Eastern Orthodoxy, I don't think that you can accept their councils without contradiction. I think that it's impossible. Hence, I would never be Eastern Orthodox, right? But limiting myself to the first 4 centuries, which I assume by that you mean the first 300 years, that's going to be a lot harder. I mean, in terms of like really any doctrine at that point, there's not a lot of writing in general because the church was persecuted greatly. But I think I would appeal to, right off the bat, Pope Victor with the way that he acts with respect to the Asian churches. Even Protestant scholarship admits that this is a show of supremacy, and as I quoted Orthodox scholarship in my debate. Additionally, his de jure power to do such a thing is not questioned, right?
And so when was that?
180.
180. Okay.
Yeah.
And what did he do?
I'll read a quick summary by a historian. That's all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this is from an Anglican guy. He says, blah, blah, blah. At no point in history is this preeminence so evident as under Pope Victor. When from Gaul to Orestine, his invitation for the summoning of councils to effect a settlement on the paschal controversy was everywhere accepted.
Your
the initiative
mic,
of Pope.
Just so you know, your mic is kind of dying.
I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's.
Well, did you switch mics again?
You got a crappy cord, I think. Are you cord connected?
I thought I connected my mic to the laptop thing. Just 1 second, let me figure it out.
Yeah.
If you're using a cord, it sounds like you have a loose. This is like what bad cords sound like, at least on my end.
Potentially, that's what's happening. I just want to make sure that people can hear him and they're not, getting too much difficulty with their ears because of the breaking up.
'Cause breaking up is hard to do. Sorry.
No, we need some. Dead space is always bad. So if you can fill the dead space while we wait,
I don't
that's
know, man. I'm that dude. If I jump in an elevator and it gets quiet, I'm like, okay, this is real life right
All right.
here. Oh,
This should be better now.
Oh, there we go. That's it. That's what it sounded like when it was good. Yeah. Okay, so
Yeah,
go back to
so
that quote and go back to I don't know, just go back to the beginning of it and just reread it.
says at no point in history is this preeminence so evident as under Pope Victor, when from Gaul to Orestes, his invitation for the summoning of councils to effect a settlement on the paschal controversy was everywhere accepted. This initiative of Pope Victor alone, an initiative proved to be effective, suffices to show how evident in those ancient times was the exceptional situation and ecumenical authority of the Roman Church. That's Dr. Beresford Kidd, an Anglican scholar. Um,
So you
Additionally,
would
there's some other historians I could quote who describe how Pope Victor, after calling these synods together, there's a general consensus on the date of Easter, except for some churches in Asia, which write back to the Pope and to the rest of the church resisting. The Pope thereby excommunicates them from the entire church, the common unity, Eusebius says. Um, and that's essentially what happens. I think it's
so
good
what
evidence for Roman primacy.
so what you're saying is that because he had this initiative to call councils and everybody listened to him, that affirms primacy. Am I getting your argument correct?
Yeah, I mean, he commanded the whole world to call councils to discuss a doctrinal issue, and then he cut off entire churches on his own authority without an ecumenical council.
Okay. So, Warfare, I'm going to ask you the question next, but I do kind of want to hear what you have to say about that example that Matthew brought forward.
well, as usual, there's some echo going on somewhere, but I'm
Matthew,
gonna give
just
him.
mute while he's talking. Just mute while he's talking, if you can. Go ahead, Warfare.
I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that maybe he hasn't looked at everything. I don't know, because here's why I say that. Anyone listening right now can go into the debate citations text channel and they can look at, you don't even have to download it, it's an internet link. You can look at the source I threw in there at the very top. F.W. Puller, he's an Anglican scholar. Okay. Now, Matthew thinks Pope Victor is proof of papal supremacy, but he doesn't tell anybody that when Pope Victor got all hotty-toddy and wanted to excommunicate the Eastern churches, that St. Irenaeus was like, nah, bro. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, right? But anyone, jot this down in your notepad. Go to page 17 in the source that I gave in the text chat. There's the whole rest of that chapter. The next 14 pages after that are devoted to this particular controversy. And basically, when Pope Victor tried to boss up, St. Irenaeus wasn't like, oh, yeah, you're the man. Everybody has to listen. He was like, dude, don't do that. Preserve the unity of the church. Like, fall back, Tom Cruise, right? Like that sort of thing.
Okay.
And we also know from St. Firmilian's letters that the Quartodecimans, they continued their practices for like at least a good 60 years after this event. So basically, Pope spoke up and nobody cared. This is corroborated in Eusebius's church history, where Eusebius says that Pope Victor, he doesn't say Pope Victor excommunicated the Asian churches like Matthew just said. Eusebius says Pope Victor endeavored. That means he attempted, he tried to cut off the Asian churches from communion, but nobody cared. St. Irenaeus lightweight rebuked him and was like, bro, you can't even go there. This practice continued for 60 years at least, as they remained in communion with Polycrates. That's from Polar page 18. So anyone can look at that.
Okay, great. So if I might just summarize real quick, Matthew's position is that it is very strong. He did, in fact, put this decree out for them to come together in councils, and they all listened to him. And this indicates that he had papal authority, and it's a very strong indication of that in 180 AD. Am I getting that right? I'm re-summarizing for the people's sake here, Matthew. Is that correct?
No, I think that Warfare's characterization of the events are pretty
No,
flawed.
me.
And I could.
Am I correct in
Oh, I'm
your?
sorry. What did you say?
Okay, so I was trying to restate your position, and I said your position is that the events were such that he sent out decrees for the gathering of councils. They listened to him. They listened to him, and they all accepted his authority, and so this essentially proves papal authority in 180 AD. Is that a correct distillation of your position?
So I would say that the initial part where he calls the church to have local councils to discuss the issue, that was listened to without any sort of complaints or anything. The next part, when he decided to cut off from the common unity, is what Eusebius says, the churches of Asia. Irenaeus says that he should consider the things of peace and of neighborly unity and love, right? Essentially, so Irenaeus and some of the other bishops were saying to Victor, look, your predecessors, previous popes, which this is the case, right? Previous popes had been more merciful and more patient with this difference in festival worship, essentially, a difference in feast day, right? And that you should do the same thing. You shouldn't split the church over this. But nevertheless, they never say to him, hey, look, you don't have jurisdiction in Asia. You can't pronounce this against people in Asia. They never did that.
So, was my distillation of your position correct for the audience's sake?
Yeah, I think generally.
Okay. Yep. All right. So, and then Warfare's position, and Warfare, you can again correct me if I get this wrong, is that actually no, he simply requested, and not everybody even listened to begin with. To him, and some people saw this as an overreach and responded, such as Irenaeus. Would that be a correct distillation of your position?
Yeah, I mean that's like the beginning, but I just posted something into the debate citations text chat, which, if you don't mind, I'll read.
Yeah, you may read it, and then I want to move on after that.
So this is from the 3-volume set by Jurgens, who's a pretty staunch Vatican I apologist. He's a Roman Catholic. So on this issue, he speaks of Irenaeus, right? And when the Blessed Polycarp was visiting Rome, okay, instead of read it, hold on. Let me just, I posted it into the debate citation thing. Anyone who wants can read it. Let me just kind of freestyle here. When you get to the bottom of what he says, in this state of affairs, they remained in communion with each other, right? What happens here, like I said, if you go and you look at pages 17 and 18 in that polar link that I also give in the debate citation text chat, you can educate yourselves on this, anybody. Eusebius talks about how Pope Victor endeavored. Matthew keeps saying that he excommunicated them or he cut them off or whatever. Pope Victor tried to do that, but it didn't wash out that way. We know that it didn't wash out that way from the letters of St. Firmilian, where we know that the Quartodecimans continued their practices for a good 60 years. So it wasn't like, I mean, he could maybe take that and go like, oh, well, they were just disobedient Easterners or whatever, right?
Okay.
But here's the thing. My point is, if those Quartodecimans, if the church as a whole thought at that time, like what Vatican I teaches, or like if the Pope says, you go buy blue shoes, then you go buy blue shoes no matter what, we wouldn't have that reaction in history. History would be different. They would have dropped it right then and there. They would have went and bought blue shoes, clicked up with the Pope, and that's how history would be.
So I want to kind of direct the conversation in a different direction now. I think everybody got both of you guys' points on Matthew's argument.
I'd like to say something, though, I think.
Well, if it's short, if it's very short.
Yeah. So problem here is that if you actually just read what Eusebius says, he says Victor goes to cut them off from the common unity. He doesn't mention anyone objecting de jure to what he's doing, right? Nobody objects and says, hey, Pope, you don't have jurisdiction over there. And notice how when I read Chalcedon, the legates do say, hey, look, Alexandria, you don't have jurisdiction here. The church will do that with people, but they don't do it with Pope Victor for some reason. And secondly, even though the Quaturdecimans continued doing their heretical practice, it doesn't mean that the rest of the church didn't recognize Rome's authority. Even after the Council of Nicaea condemned, again, the Quartodecimans, they continued to do their thing. Does this mean that Nicaea is not authoritative? No. And even after Nicaea, most of the church rejected its decrees regarding the consubstantiality of the Son with the Father. Does this mean Nicaea is not authoritative? No, of
We're in
course
the
not.
weeds now.
Okay, well, let's not get in the weeds too much here. Thank you, Matthew. You said your piece. Wherefore, I know you probably have things you want to say, but I would like to move on for the audience's sake. They've got
No,
I think the idea here. So
Well,
at
if
this,
anyone wants my follow-up to that, make a note and ask me later.
yeah, I'm sorry, Warfer. I want to give ample time to both sides in this regard. And the question I asked Matthew, it was a pressing question, and I think it's a pressing question for your side as well. So I'm going to restate it, but before I do, there's something preliminary we need to get out of the way for you, and that's that everybody kind of knows Matthew's ecclesiology because it's in the resolution of the debate, right? But not everybody really knows your ecclesiology, and so for me to be able to pose the question I posed to Matthew to you, I'd like you to give a brief, like if you can keep it to like 5 minutes at the most, 2.5 minutes at the least. That'd be great. Of what is the ecclesiology that you think the church had in the first 4 centuries, and that you think is the right ecclesiology, if you may, and then I'll direct the conversation to the question I asked Matthew.
Okay. All right. Let me man up here. 2.5 on the minimum, 5 at the maximum. Okay.
Yeah.
And the thrust of the question is, to clarify again,
what is your ecclesiology that you're kind of positing is in the first 4 centuries, right?
Now, forgive my pedantry, but there's at least 2 senses in which we could ask that question. One of them would be, what is, might be better asked something like this. What were the ecclesiastical procedures of the church in the first 4 centuries? And what that means is something like, what were the norms for the externals of human church government in the first 4 centuries?
In terms of
hold on.
contra the papacy, right?
Well,
right.
No, I'm being completely, no, I'm not even talking, the papacy is not even on my mind.
Right.
That's what I mean. This is a huge question. The other angle is, what is the ecclesiology in a Eucharistic or mystical sense? I'm sorry if that frustrates anyone here, but it's a point that people don't even stop to consider, right? So should I, if you want, I'll just ramble on. I'll make it at least 2.5 minutes, and I'll make sure that it goes no more than 5. You want to just do that?
Well, yeah, I'd like you to, but I want to be clear about what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for what was the structure of the leadership of the church in the first 4 centuries that you are arguing for, and just what is that structure?
4 centuries. Okay, so when you say that, you're obviously referring to the first sense in which I perceive the question, like the expression of the ecclesiastical human side of the
like bishops, deacons, right? Like
right.
what roles? How did those roles work out? All that kind of thing.
Right. Okay. All right. Well then, let's cue up the old counter here. Here we go. So, I mean, I think that was really covered pretty thoroughly in my presentation. I don't want to just like defer or default to it. But if I were, if you were to ask me to break out the highlights of it, I would say things like synodality and conciliarity.
What do those mean?
Well, the voice of the whole, in the same way that each hypostasis of the Trinity, each person of the divine and holy Trinity, must always act in accord with the other. That is the unity to which the church is supposed to aspire.
So unity among synods?
Unity among the church as the mystical body of Christ.
Okay.
So how does that work out in a human? This is the nuance of the question. There's the governmental aspect of church unity, and there's a Eucharistic aspect of church unity. They're two different but related things.
So tie those together.
That's
tie them together, if you can.
Tall order there.
I know. We're trying to help out people here, right? That's the goal.
So I think that it's expressed pretty well, actually, in the Apostolic Canon 34. So let me see if I can pull that up really quick from my notes here. I mentioned it in Rebuttal 1 at the bottom. Here it is. So, okay. Apostolic Canon 34 reads, quote, "The bishops of every nation must acknowledge him who is first among them and account him as their head, and do nothing of consequence without his consent. But each may do those things only which concern his own parish, and the country places which belong to it. But neither let him who is the first do anything without the consent of all, for so there will be unanimity, and God will be glorified through the Lord and the Holy Spirit." End quote. Now, I picked that. That's a better example than even I think I initially realized, because that describes to a T the perichoretic angle of the interpersonal relationship in the Trinity. Well, let's go over it again. "The bishops of every nation must acknowledge him who is first among them and account him as their head." The Father is the head. "And do nothing of consequence without his consent." Neither the Son nor the Spirit would never do anything outside the will of the Father. You see what I'm getting at there?
Okay,
there's a unity. It's anyone. I mean, I hate to just like throw this word around, but perichoresis. Anyone here who knows what perichoresis is understands what I'm driving at here. The unity.
Sorry, real quick. Who's this quote?
Please, Beethoven, please don't interrupt too much. But yeah, what he wants to know who the quote is from.
It's Apostolic Canon 34. I believe that it's in the. Here, I'll just dump it in there really quick, and you can read it to your heart's content. Give me
thank you.
10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, there you go.
So, if I may step in, is that okay, or you were in the middle?
Always, man. You're the Pope right now.
So I see it as my job to try to distill what you're saying for a wider audience, right? So if I may try to do that, and then you tell me if I'm doing it correctly, right? So what you're saying is that every bishop essentially has jurisdiction and power over his own area, and if one bishop is trying to make a decision that might affect the whole church, let's say, all bishops of all areas must agree. And that's what we would call a council or a synod, right? Is that a good distillation of how the ecclesiology would suss out, in practical terms?
I think so, because when you revisit all of the canons that I mentioned in round 2, that's exactly, not even like ambiguously, what they drive at, right? Every ecumenical council affirms the dogmatic decrees, the canons, and so on and so forth of the council before it. So we have like the utmost respect for unity, and in these different canons, we see the utmost respect for the preservation of jurisdictional boundaries.
Now, if I might ask, would you also argue that we do have a sort of first among equals position in terms of council meetings, where there is someone who presides over the councils just for the sake of keeping some form of, so the councils don't go all crazy and they don't just throw things at each other. You know what I mean? Like, would you argue for that?
Logistics.
Okay, you would argue for a logistical authority over the councils, is what you would argue for a first among equals type situation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
when all these bishops start flying off the rails saying this or that, or condemn this dude or anathematize that dude, there has to be somebody that slams a gavel down and is like, "Yo, shut up! Let's get this thing on the rails." You need that.
Right.
That's leadership. Leadership is not jurisdiction.
So that would be the difference, really, ultimately, between your position and Matthew's position. Now that people kind of know what your ecclesiology is, my question that I directed at Matthew, I'm going to direct at you. Okay, this is where the hard ball comes down, just like it came down on Matthew earlier. And the hard ball is, when you look back at the history, what argument is the strongest for your form of ecclesiology in the first 4 centuries of the church, and why is that argument the strongest argument for it?
Well, is the framing here that I can only reference something that happened in the first 4 centuries? That's what I'm perceiving.
A document, it can be, well, for 4 centuries, remember, the apostolic canons are in the first 4 centuries. I'm talking about, right, you get to 400. 400 still is in the first 4 centuries, technically. So,
right.
If you want to use the apostolic canons, you can. But I'm just asking for, what was that, Matthew?
Well, 400s is not the 4th century. That's
I'm not saying 400s. I'm saying for the year 400. Like, if something happened in the year 400, I'm okay with that. That's in the bounds of my thought process. Right.
The first 4 centuries covers everything up to 399 New Year's Eve.
Okay.
Right?
I mean, if you want to go that route, you can. Sure.
I don't, but I'm just trying to get from you the parameters that I have.
Well, when I think of the first 4 centuries, I think everything first century to the year 400, and then that's it. That's where the buck stops. Right. So,
okay.
Yeah.
And so, with that being said, I'm sorry. May I belabor you to repeat the question?
Sure. So, what is the? Sorry, I need to go back to here. When we're looking at the history of things, what argument is the strongest for your form of ecclesiology in the first 4 centuries of Christianity, and why is that the strongest argument?
And I should limit myself to one?
You can give multiple, but try to keep it a little shortish if you can, like 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, I can keep it shorter than that. I think in general, and obviously you can't offer an argument from silence as your sole deal, right? But I demonstrated pretty well in my presentation that, Vatican primacy was not present in the 1st or 2nd century. I don't care which way Matthew wants to skew the situation with Pope Victor. Even if I bought his claims, it's not Vatican I primacy. We see in church history, in that incident, and especially in the incident with Saint Cyprian, we see a pretty willing resistance of bishops to resist the Roman See.
I need to just scoop you up here for a second.
Yeah, sure.
You're not really answering my question right now. What you're doing is you're kind of answering a different question. You're answering the question of what's the argument against papal primacy. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for what is the argument for your ecclesiology, particularly, right?
But per Boolean nature, arguments against papal primacy, against that, it entails that there are arguments for our position. But I don't want to be confrontational. So
yeah, I'm just trying to help the audience here. I don't think, ultimately.
Okay, then re-ask the question, and I'll do it one more time from 2 to 3 minutes, and I'll try not to do what I think you think I just did.
Yeah. Okay, looking at the history of it, what argument is the strongest for your form of ecclesiology in the first 4 centuries of the history of the church, and why is that the strongest argument?
Well, if I had to say one thing, I'd say basically what I just read, Apostolic Canon 34.
Okay.
There's a very clear constrainment there, and there's something that mirrors something in theology. This isn't just like a mimicking of like the Roman Senate or something like that. No, I'll read the canon again. The bishops of every nation must acknowledge him who is first among them and account him as their head, and do nothing of consequence without his consent, but each may do those things only which concern his own parish, and the country places which belong to it. But neither let him who is the first do anything without the consent of all, for so there will be unanimity. I can't explain it better than that. I honestly think that's like the best explanation of true Orthodox, non-papist ecclesiology. There's room there for primacy in some qualified sense. At the same time, it flips in the other direction and it says, hey, even though there's primacy, we must have the consent of all. This is the doctrine of the Pentarchy. This is the doctrine of the ecumenical councils coming together with Rome ratifying X and the Eastern churches being on board. There's not one ecumenical council that lacks one or the other of those factors, right? There's not one ecumenical council that does that. Any council received as ecumenical, either by Orthodox or Roman Catholics, every one of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we could even stop there for the sake of bickering. Every one of those 7 councils had the ratification of everybody.
And if I'm not mistaken,
That's not true at all.
Well, hold on, Matthew. Just let me say this, and then I'm going to actually pass it over to you. If I'm not mistaken, the apostolic canons are from 350 AD. I've done some research on this, and that seems to be the date that they're from. Just so the audience knows, it does kind of fit within those parameters. Now, Matthew, you're totally welcome to respond, but I will direct the conversation away from this topic eventually. So go ahead.
I mean, there's a whole lot to say with this. The claim that there was unanimity in the 7 councils is just not true at all. Nicaea was hotly rejected after it was initially held, and Arian Council was held after that. It had more bishops, imperial backing. Even with Constantinople I, the West simply wasn't there. Even some of the Eastern patriarchates weren't there because it was a local council at the time. Ephesus didn't have Antioch or Jerusalem. Chalcedon didn't have Alexandria, among others. I mean, you can keep going down the
Can I ask
list.
something of this? I want to ask something of you in this regard. Well, because the thought that immediately came to mind is isn't what you're saying, doesn't what you're saying hurt both apostolic traditions? Because the apostolic traditions claim is that these were ecumenical councils, and it sounds to me like you're saying, well, they weren't.
No, they absolutely are.
Okay, how are they ecumenical if like they didn't have the full Christian world, right? I mean, that's what it sounds like you're saying. Am I wrong?
It's just impossible. It's impossible to have the entire Christian world agree on something. It's not going to happen.
What does ecumenical mean then in your mind?
Well, in a general sense, especially back then, it would refer to the emperor setting out a decree for the bishops of the Christian world to come and discuss doctrinal issues. But no matter the council, somebody is going to walk away unhappy. And in the case of Ephesus, the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Patriarch of Antioch walked away unhappy. The emperor himself was unhappy. So it's just not the case that these things are sort of always agreed upon. And you have councils like the Iconoclast Council right before Nicaea, which states that, or it doesn't state, but had more bishops than like any of the councils and they condemned the veneration of icons, right? And the church's response to this is very interesting, to say the least, right? I'd like to read a couple things here.
Okay.
And so I'm reading this here regarding this council, the Iconoclast Council. We get further confirmation of Rome's chief influence in the councils in the third session of Second Nicaea. It was known that just like at the Sixth Council, the patriarchs of Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem could not make it to the council due to the hindrance created by Arab occupation and persecution. It was stated that in the place of their presence there would be two synkeloi, which means principal assistants of the patriarchs. These two would stand in the council and speak for all three of the patriarchs to fill their assent to their decrees. For if only Rome and Constantinople were truly present, this calls into question of the potential of the second Nicaea to achieve an ecumenical status when 3 out of the 5 patriarchs were not there. One letter on behalf of the Eastern patriarchs anticipated this and even pressed on that, despite their absence, the bishops should not be offended, quote, should not be offended by the absence of the most holy patriarchs of the 3 apostolic sees and the most sacred bishops under them. Well, what did they offer in place of this absence? They go on in the letter to say that the absence should not hinder the council, quote, especially since the most holy and apostolic pope of old Rome has expressed his agreement with it and is cooperating through his apostolic apocrisiary. And now, most holy one, Tarasios, may take this place with God's help, just as in the faith of that council resonated to the ends of the world, so now through your help, and that one, the one who directs the apostolic see of the chief of the apostles, the faith of the council about to the assemble by the grace of Christ will be proclaimed in the whole world beneath the sun. And further, this discussion about the primate in the apostolic canons, I don't even necessarily agree with what he read. If you're talking about Rome's patriarchal primacy as opposed to Rome's universal jurisdictional primacy, because there is a difference. Rome was the patriarch of the West. It had specific prerogatives as patriarch of the West, just as the patriarch of Constantinople did. And in that sense, yes, that absolutely applies. But as is seen many times in history, if you accept the principle on a universal scale, right, where Leo, as primate of the universal church, says that he is the shepherd of shepherds, the Council of Chalcedon says that Pope Leo is the ruler of the whole world. It doesn't make any sense to say that the ruler of the whole world, the shepherd of shepherds, can't do anything without the agreement of all of the rest of the bishops, because you're never going to get anything done. I mean, for the love of God, even the president of the United States has more power than such a leader that warfare is proposing. The president
So
can't.
he went pretty hard into the weeds. I'd like to address your question,
Yeah,
Valin.
yeah. You may address it. We don't have a ton of time left, so try to keep it to 5 minutes if you can.
Well, then, do you want to restate like the most kind of important part of your question then? Because I thought that you know, where we left off before the marsh was that, you know, you said, isn't this a problem for both of your ecclesiologies? Isn't
Yeah, like
this,
my question relating to the councils, because what it seemed to me that Matthew was saying was that like these councils weren't really ecumenical, and like the both ecclesiologies would be damaged if that were true, right? I think because
right?
both
Well,
ecclesiologies
They are
assume,
ecumenical.
yeah,
yeah,
he's wrong, or express himself in a way that maybe he didn't mean to, because the point is, everybody today accepts those as ecumenical. So that's reception theory. We receive them as ecumenical. Now you can say something like this,
That's not
and
true.
when he went down, so I let you talk for 4 minutes, dude. When he went down his laundry list and he was saying things, well, all right, let's talk about Constantinople one. It was a local council in nature or calling or whatever, right? It was called to address, you know, interdiocesan quibbles between the Eastern churches. Rome wasn't even there. They had to have like another follow-up council in a year where, because Rome was like basically like bummed about not being there. And I'm totally paraphrasing and trying to make this concise. It wasn't until after that council that Rome even came, right? But then, okay, so yeah, you can say something like, oh, well, you know, at Constantinople one, the West wasn't even there. But guess what? The West came later. And guess what? As time went on, the church received that council as ecumenical. So I would distance myself from Matthew's whole deal there. And I affirm and uphold that all 7 of those councils are indeed to this day ecumenical for Orthodox or Roman Catholics, despite whatever little bits of intermittent bickering might have been going on at the time, right? The claim here isn't there's never any bickering in church history. I mean, that's just silly. So if you want
Well,
to lead with another
yeah,
question,
I mean,
I'm
isn't
happy
it the idea, if I'm not mistaken, and both of you can comment on this briefly, but isn't it the case that the ecumenical nature of the council is derived from a few different things? One is, yes, that it is a large portion of bishops, but 2, how they are received, and 3, also, ultimately speaking, like, the decision that's reached at the council is, even if grudgingly agreed to, still agreed to. Like, I understand that at Nicaea, there was 3 bishops they sent away, as were excommunicating you because you didn't sign the statement. But ultimately speaking, at the time, that would have been considered, this is the decision of the church, would it not? Right. So, are those 3 parameters good parameters for thinking through the issue of what's ecumenical for our audience?
where the parameters again are reception of the church over time, the overwhelming majority of the bishops present, and
the decision of the council being agreed to by the majority of the bishops at the council.
Yeah, I think that's a good baseline. Sure.
Would you agree with that, Matthew?
Generally, but there's many fathers who explicitly talk about Rome's ratification is essential. Second Nicaea says that. Chalcedon says that.
I'm not trying to argue against, just so you know. My point wasn't to argue against papal authority in the councils. My point was just to say, what is the standard for saying something is ecumenical, right? And
I would
and you can
generally agree.
include
I think I would say
you can
that
include the papal view in that. You can add that on to my 3 things, but are my 3 things good? Is my question.
yeah, I think generally, I think you just have to be careful when you say like yes, ecumenical councils are characterized by like all the bishops are tasked with coming together to discuss the faith. That's certainly an aspect. But when you talk about like all the bishops, like, okay, well, it's not literally all the bishops. It's just like in a general sense, the Christian church comes together to talk about these sorts of things. And it's not determined by like democratic vote either, which is another thing which makes this difficult. And additionally, it needs to be obviously discussion of the faith. Obviously, it needs to be received in a certain sense, and it must be ratified by the Bishop of Rome, and ideally needs to be ratified by the patriarchates too.
Okay. Okay. All
So,
right. Okay, that's fine. I just was wondering if my 3 things were generally good parameters for the audience to understand. Whether or not they hold the Eastern Orthodox or Catholic views, those 3 things are common between you. That would be correct, right? Matthew.
I'm sorry. Regardless of what.
Though, regardless of if someone is Eastern Orthodox or Catholic, those 3 points about ecumenical councils would be common ground, right?
Generally, yeah.
Okay.
I've been dying to read. I've got to go very soon, but I've been
Yeah,
dying
we've
to
got
read a
15
couple of
minutes left
quotes.
here.
I've been
Well,
dying to
what
read a couple quotes about this. They're not that long.
about what exactly? Ecumenical councils?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if you think they would help the audience and they're not too confusing, then that would be great.
Yeah, they're not too bad. So I read the one from Galatius earlier, and he just says that the constitution of any synod which has been approved by the consent of the whole church can be executed by no other see than the first, which confirms any synod by its authority, etc., etc. Right. Here is Saint Nikephoros, Patriarch of Constantinople in the 700s, talking about Nicaea. He says, without whom the Romans presiding in the Seventh Council A doctrine brought forward in the Church could not, even though confirmed by canonical decrees and by ecclesiastical usage, ever obtain full approval or currency, for it is they, the popes of Rome, who have been assigned to them the rule in sacred things, and who have reached into their hands the dignity of headship among the apostles. And he's Patriarch of Constantinople. Another Patriarch of Constantinople, Theodore the Studite, says also in the 700s, since to great Peter, Christ our Lord gave the office of chief shepherd, after entrusting him with the keys of the kingdom of heaven, to Peter or to his successor must every necessity and novelty be referred to in the Catholic Church. And he also says, let Patriarch Nicephorus of Constantinople assemble a synod of those with whom he has been at variance. If it is
So
impossible that representatives of the other patriarchs should be present, a thing which might certainly be if the emperor should wish the Western Patriarch to be present, to whom it is given authority over an ecumenical synod, but let him make peace and union by sending his synodical letters to the prelate of the first see. And one more, this is from St. Cyril and Methodius, or rather just St. Methodius, Byzantine, Eastern guy. He says, because of his primacy, the Pontiff of Rome is not required to attend an ecumenical council, but without his participation, manifested by sending some subordinates, every ecumenical council is non-existent, for it is he who presides over the council.
okay,
And
so
that's it.
Warfare,
So
do you have any quotes?
no, I do, and this is particularly irritating, and here is why. The 10-page little paper case study PDF that I put in debate citations addresses parts of these exact things that he's saying here now. Now,
Okay.
granted, I kind of dropped it as a bomb. He didn't have the time to read it. But
Yeah.
anyone here listening still here, go and grab that PDF and look through it. These are Eric Ibarra quote mines that make it seem like noble patriarchs, like Saint Nicephorus, Saint Theodore the Studite. He makes it sound like they try to they're pushing some
So
pro-papal narrative. Go look. Let me read to you
I
right
didn't
now.
get
So,
this
for
from
example,
Eric Ibarra.
what I'd
let me
like
read
from
to
you.
you. Okay,
I got it
go
from
ahead.
Francis Dvornik,
Oh
not
wait,
Eric Ibarra.
Yeah.
hold on.
No, you got it from Eric Ibarra, and I showed how.
I'm reading it from
Because
Francis Dvornik.
Okay,
only Eric Ibarra
I
spells
wanna
Nicephorus Nikiph. Come on,
I
dude.
wanna
Anyone can go look at
okay,
this
I wanna direct the
nonsense.
conversation away from the Eric Ibarra, like whatever it is, whoever's right about that. I really don't care. It doesn't help the audience, ultimately speaking.
It does. It really
Um,
does, though.
Well, I think
But
like what would really help the audience right now would be you reading quotes from your side about the
sure.
ecumenical councils, right?
So here we go. So he appeals to, and he's talking about Dvornik. He says, "Oh, I quote Dvornik." No, you quote Dvornik through Ibarra's site. I know you said you want to walk away from that, but here,
That's
let
not
me add
true,
this.
Evan.
It is too. Anyone can go look at this PDF. Go look at it.
Okay, can we just have you quote, please?
Sure.
A little bit of
So, okay. Apologeticus Major. This is in the PDF, so I'm going to try to be quick. Saint Nicephorus, who Matthew thinks is a papist, quote, "For so the ecclesiastical rule from of old commands, those matters in the Church of God which are doubtful or disputed are to be solved in ecumenical councils and defined by the agreement and determination of the illustrious patriarchs on the apostolic thrones," end quote. I'm emphasizing the plural there. Nothing in there about the Roman Pope. So, okay, another one here. And this is from the same book that Matthew is looking. Well, Matthew's not looking at this book, but I have this book in front of me right now in my hand. He has Eric Ibarra's blog. I have this book. Here's what it says. Quote, "It is the ancient law of the church that whatever uncertainties or controversies arise in the church of God, they are resolved and defined by the ecumenical synods with the assent and approbation of the bishops who hold the apostolic sees." That's from the Vornik, page 102. It's physically in my hand, dude.
So that would support the apostolic sees, meaning the three apostolic sees, right? Am I thinking correctly here?
No,
In
it
terms of what he
supports
means
it.
by that.
Well, in his specific context, I'm going to say that he had the pentarchy in mind. I don't know about that, but I can
Pentarchy
tell
is
you from the.
five
You're
apostolic
right.
sees.
Right,
Okay.
but I can tell you what he doesn't have in mind, or else he would have said it, which is this idea of Rome only. I encourage everybody to go look at that PDF and
I
read
never
through
said that.
what I did.
So
Dude, come on.
that's okay. That's okay. It's okay. I think here's the thing. The key is they got the quotes from you and they got the quotes from Matthew. We have 9 minutes left, and I have one last area I'd like to
Well,
cover with you guys.
can I comment on St. Theodore the Studite?
If it's quick, if it's like a minute or two,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So here we go. So Matthew quoted St. Theodore the Studite. I show in this PDF how it's a lift straight off Ibarra's blog. Here's what Dvornik in Byzantium and the Roman Primacy, page 101, says of St. Theodore. Quote, "But here it is a question of divine and heavenly decisions, and those are reserved only to him to whom the word of God has said, whoever you shall bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Who are their successors? He who occupies the throne of Rome and is the first, the one who sits upon the throne of Constantinople and is the second, after them, those of Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. That is the pentarchic authority in the church. It is to them that all decision, to them, he says, that all decision belongs in divine dogmas," end quote. That's St. Theodore the Studite, in Dvornik, Byzantium and the Roman Primacy, page 101, in my hand right here. Naughty Bar's blog.
Nobody
Okay.
disagrees with that.
Okay.
I got to comment on this, Valin. I'm sorry, but
Just 1
I
minute,
never
please.
said that the Pope alone has an ecumenical council. I said the other patriarchates are supposed to support and be there. Absolutely. And yes, I agree with Nikephoros. The primary way we solve issues in the church is through ecumenical councils. Hence why, as St. Robert Bellarmine jokes 500 years ago, the Greeks have had 0 councils since the Reformation. The Catholic Church has had 10. And now, 500 years onwards, we've had another 4 councils or so. And the Greeks, like the Eastern Orthodox, have had 0. So I don't know
Something's
what's going
wrong.
on. Yeah,
Okay.
something's wrong in the East. If the way you solve dogmatic issues is through ecumenical councils, and you haven't had one in 1,000 years,
Well,
something's happening.
I have one thing to say here
What a
in this
joke.
regard, in the middle here. As I study church history, it appears to me that the post-Reformation ecumenical councils of the West are specifically responding to doctrinal problems that arise because of that reformation. Is that not correct, Matthew?
Uh, Generally,
Right.
I would say, yeah.
So the question would then be, well, does the East need councils? Did they have doctrinal issues? The only one that I can think of was there was a council that covered Calvinism after the Reformation, and that's because there was a doctrinal issue going on, potentially inside the church because of that. But outside of that, there doesn't seem to be any, unless you could point out a theological issue that arose in Eastern Orthodoxy that required a council. I don't know of any, and I'm just saying that for the audience's sake.
Well, a general council about justification, the sacraments, the way that baptism works, papal
But
primacy, the filioque, the sale of indulgences, which the Eastern Patriarchs also participated in. There's a
hmm,
lot of stuff, right? I mean, just think about this. He's here telling you that papism is a serious heresy, which the ancient church didn't believe, except the popes did. But who cares about that? Apparently, right? And that nevertheless,
Straw
these
man.
popes claimed this for hundreds of years. The church didn't do anything about the popes claiming this. And now we're over 1,000 years onward. The popes, like Boniface VIII, have claimed, crazy things. And the Eastern Church has not had an ecumenical council to address the heresy of papism, which has stolen away most of their flock. So
okay,
something is
so
seriously wrong in the
okay,
Orthodox
so
Church.
you gave an answer. That's good. I'm not going to press you on it any further because I'd like to move on. We've got like 5 minutes left. And if we can get this in shortly, I'd very much appreciate it because I think the audience would benefit from it. I want to move now to the theological argument for the ecclesiologies that both of you hold, right? And I know a lot of people have heard. I know that like Warfare gave a little bit of that in his presentation, and Matthew also gave a little bit of that in his presentation. I don't want you to specifically quote Bible verses at me, but rather just give the general theological movement towards your version of ecclesiology. And I don't think that should take too long. So maybe like 2 minutes for Matthew, 2 minutes for Warfare. Matthew, would you go on that?
Yeah, sure. Let me just get some things I'll read for a second.
I mean, if you could go
To
off the
kind of
top of your head,
explain
that'd be
here.
okay.
I got it here. So,
I'll go off the top of my head.
well, yeah, I can go off the top of my head if you need me to. So,
Yeah.
I quoted in my debate where Pope Leo talks about how the election of the apostles was equal in a certain sense, but they do not have a uniform rank. There was a certain distinction of power. Peter is set out among the rest, and this distinction of power continues on to the episcopate itself. And everything he says converges towards Peter's one seat. Likewise, St. Jerome says that St. Peter was made head so that schism. Hold on one second. He says that St. Peter was made head so schism would not arise. And as I read St. Optatus of Malev, the Roman cathedra is where Peter first sat. Whoever separates from it is a schismatic and a sinner, because Rome is where everything converges towards. Leo calls himself the shepherd of shepherds. And as is the case for all of divine history, uh, divine revelation, God institutes divinely guided monarchies in the Old Testament and in the New Covenant, as Jesus Christ is himself a king and a monarch. And furthermore, the church fathers repeat over and over again that monarchy is the preferred method of governance. And that's what carried over to the church. But monarchy is not at all opposed to the monarch cooperating with the other patriarchs. The other bishops are princes as well. They are princes in a lot of the same senses that the Pope is a prince. It's just that you need to have a final decision made, there has to be one place to where everything bottoms out and where everything converges to, right? And that's what the papal primacy is there for. And the body cannot act without its head, and the head can't really act without the body either. They work together in unison, right? And when the head acts, the body moves with the decision of the head. You don't have the body go flailing off somewhere else when the head makes a decision. So if the Pope makes a decision and the body starts moving in a different direction, that is not the body anymore. They have severed themselves from the church. As Pope Boniface said, they are exiles from the Christian religion. That's an Orthodox saint who said that, if you separate from Rome. And so I think we could go on with this forever.
Okay.
But that would be kind of a general sense. I think warfare has tried to pit papal primacy against conciliarity and having councils and things like this. But again, we have had 21 ecumenical councils and counting. And Pope Francis is holding a whole thing about synality and conciliarity and all this. We're not opposed to that. That's not a problem. It works in unison and in tandem with papal primacy. It's not an issue.
So for the audience's sake, I will just say one thing. In addition to what Matthew has stated, Eric Ybarra, I know there's contention surrounding him right now, but I'm going to bring him up anyways. Eric Ybarra's debates that he's been in, where he's discussed the theological side, might also be helpful for the audience. I just wanted to bring that up. Warfare, why don't you now give us your theological position as to towards your ecclesiology?
Well, I've gave it before. It's, I think, most succinctly expressed in Apostolic Canon 34, which Matthew just pretty much paid lip service to. The problem is that Vatican I is not compatible with that canon. Vatican I pays lip service to conciliarity in a certain sense, but at the end of the day, Vatican I says that when the rubber hits the road, the Pope is the boss, right? Now, like, what did he just say? He said, oh, well, like, warfare is trying to pit the one against the other. In a sense, right? Because that's what Vatican I at the end of the day does. It
So
basically. Go ahead.
what is your? But see, I'm getting your pushback on Matthew, and that's fine. But what is your theological exposition of
Well, I mean,
the theology?
I've ran through it 2 times. Here goes the third. I
Okay.
think that it's best expressed in Apostolic Canon 34, right? I think in Apostolic Canon 34, which Matthew just kind of articulated, I think he's actually onto something there. He's essentially arguing for orthodoxy without necessarily realizing that Vatican I contradicts it, but let me get back on track. Apostolic Canon 34 mirrors the perichoretic, intercommunication of the Trinity. There's a first among equals. That phrase that he LARPs against, first among equals, that's Apostolic Canon 34. That's the Trinity. That's the actual church. It's not,
So the church
well,
mirrors the Trinity, is what you're saying.
yes, because it is the body of Christ, not in an abstract, weird, scholastic sense, but in a literal ontological reality. It is the body, right? This isn't like analogy or abstraction. It is. It is an ontological reality. And so, therefore, the nature of the church has a correspondence with the nature of the Trinity. It's a theanthropic organism. That's what Orthodoxy teaches. That might sound like a big word to a lot of people, but that's what it is. It's a theanthropic organism. That's what
Can you
Meyendorff.
define what that means? Theanthropic? For people who don't know the word.
God and man, the intersection of God and man in a nature sense or in an ontological sense, not an abstraction.
So
Right.
theos and anthropos, the two
Yes.
Greek words, anthropos
Yes.
being man, theos being
Yes.
God coming together. Got it.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So, because any acceptable ecclesiology has to tie itself to Christology and Triadology. A great thing that I didn't even get to talk about tonight, that in the beginning of this debate I wanted to be kind of like my focus, is the idea of Eucharistic ecclesiology and what all works out from that. Now, we're pretty late in the game.
Yeah.
But
Maybe we
let
can
me
have a
just,
separate event on that or something.
well, let me just say that there would never be a state of affairs where the Father would decide something without the consent of the Son or the Holy Spirit. That pattern is supposed to be followed in the church. It's not, because we're human and we're idiots and we're worms and we're sinners and all of this stuff. So it's all jacked up. But that's what it aspires to. And so, yeah, well, I mean, but Orthodox ecclesiology, it's perichoretic. Apostolic Canon 34, which I posted in that chat, I think that's, if I had to pick a one thing only to say this is it, I'm going to point to that, at least right now.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good.
I've got to go in a second.
Yeah. Well, we're
So I just want to
gonna
make a quick.
close. I
Yeah.
was just gonna close.
Okay.
So if you want to say one thing real quick, and then we're gonna close.
Well,
I would
and
just
after that, I
just
got
say
one
that.
quick thing.
No, that's fine. I would just say that. Well, the church is the body of Christ. The church isn't the Trinity itself. But even if we take that, the Father
I
is a
didn't say that.
monarch. The Father is a monarch, and he has monarchy over the other persons in a sense that it is not first among equals. If you mean first among equals with the Bishop of Rome in the sense that he is first, but he's equal in as much as he is a bishop, I agree. The Catholic Church agrees that the Pope is equal in as much as he has the same ontology as a bishop. There are certain senses in which he is a fellow priest, a fellow bishop, etc. But his jurisdiction spans really the entire world, essentially, right? And so when you even
Okay.
speak about the
No.
Roman pontiff acting outside of his jurisdiction, we don't believe that there are jurisdictional boundaries for the Pope. So it kind of just goes over our head, I think, there.
All right.
And again, yeah, that's okay.
Are
I'll
we
be
good?
back in a little while. Maybe we can talk, but I got to go
Yeah.
right now.
Well, before you go, I want to just close out here real quick. I want to say thank you
Okay.
to you, Matthew, and I want to say thank you to you, Warfare, for keeping it civil and for the amazing arguments on both sides. I think you both did a very good job. So good job, everyone! Clap for them. And thanks for coming out to everybody. We're gonna have a recording of this, so you'll be able to play it back. Don't worry about that. But thanks everyone for coming out, and thank you, Matthew and Warfare, for everything you did to prepare and everything you did tonight. I'm sure everybody here appreciates it.
You took the heat, man. Not me.
Okay, thank you, Valin.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Sorry
dudes.
for the mics. I tried to order a new microphone, but
Maybe we'll
didn't
get you
work.
one, huh? Maybe we'll just get you one.
Well, let me
Yeah.
say this. I'm down for a follow up that's like mostly toe to toe. Like this to me was an intro.
All right. Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens, I guess. But this was great. So yeah, I really appreciate it.
Right on. Well,
I might be back in a
so
little while. I'll see you guys.
so wait
All
a
right.
second. If hold on. If Matthew and you are gonna go, and now I'm sure there might be at least one other person here who wants to chime in on something, but everybody's muted in this chat.
We should just move anyone that wants to talk to Warfare / when Matthew gets back. Matthew, I guess.